Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Hey, welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I am so excited to bring you today's episode. This was such a treat to record. It's a topic that is near and dear to my heart because we're talking about burnout. Our guest today will tell us all about just how burnout is so tricky and all of the ways that it can show up in our life, as well as her journey towards understanding burnout and helping others address it. So my guest today is Neha Sangwan, MD, CEO, and founder of Intuitive Intelligence. So she is by training an internal medicine physician, also an international speaker and corporate communication expert. So between her private practice and corporate consulting, she focuses on empowering individuals, organizational leaders, and their teams with the tools for clear, effective communication. And this is the part where I'm like, yes, I'm so happy to talk to her. She addresses the root causes of stress, miscommunication, interpersonal conflict, and really puts an emphasis on healing chronic conditions by addressing these root causes. So things like headaches, insomnia, anxiety, depression, as we're talking about today, burnout. So she's consulted with organizations like the American Heart Association, American Express, Apple, Google, and she's talked about her own journey on stages like TEDx in Berkeley, Babson, among others. And she's also the author of 2 books. So she is the author of TalkRx, 5 Steps to Honest Conversations that Create Connection, Health, and Happiness, as well as the new book, Powered by Me. So in today's episode, she talks about her experience, how needing to take a medical leave of absence due to her own exhaustion just changed the course of her life and led her to spend 2 decades to discovering the real scope of burnout's effects and how we can use different scientific principles to promote healing. So we talk about a lot of different stuff in today's episode. For example, we do talk about her journey and sort of what her first steps were. We talk about the roles of unhealed trauma in terms of developing burnout. We talk about spiritual burnout. You often hear people say like, oh, well, make sure that you're working in alignment with your values. But we talk about what if you need help figuring out what those are. So we also talk about just really how to recognize when you are disconnected and how to reconnect or get on a path where you feel more connected, and things about self-care essentials and what healthy living means to her. So I hope that you find this episode as informative and inspiring as I did learning from her. So without further ado, let's get to the episode. So Neha, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. So great to be with you, Jess.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to our conversation today because just the work that you're doing really, really speaks to me. Just this idea of, healing from burnout, and it's something I've written about in my own journey, and I think it's just such a rich topic to explore. And I would love to just start with, go back to the beginning. We'll say, you've shared that taking a medical leave of absence changed the course of your life. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty abrupt shock in my life because at 33 years old, not only had no one really ever spoken to me about burnout or explained it to me, I didn't understand what was happening, and neither did any of my colleagues. So it was June 17th, 2004, and I was on my last day of a 5-day hospital rotation. So I'm an internal medicine physician. And so when you become an internist, you either go into clinic work where you're seeing patients in a clinic, or you go into the hospital where you're treating the ones who are pretty sick coming in from the emergency department or trauma, right? So I was a hospital doctor on my last day of my rotation, which means I need to dictate everything, sign it off to the next person so I can get some time off. And someone called out sick. And so I also happened to be carrying what we call the Alpha Pager, which means air traffic control for all incoming cases. So I started my day at 6 a.m. and by 11 a.m., I had only seen two of my 18 hospitalized patients. I was completely unaware of this because everything was so busy. It just kept going. And I turned to the nurse and I just said, "Hey, Nina, can you get 40 milliequivalents of IV potassium for the gentleman in 636?" And she looked at me and she said, "Dr. Sangwan, are you okay?" And I remember that moment surprising me because it was the first indication I might not be. And I said, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "That's the fourth time in under 5 minutes that you've asked me that same question, and I've answered you every time." And so that was a real wake up call for me because I had no memory of it. And I went to the bathroom and just kind of to take a breath, looked in the mirror and saw my own pale, weary face looking back in the mirror at me, picked up the phone and called a psychiatric colleague. And the only reason I knew to call this man was because 6 months earlier, one of my colleagues told me he helped her through a tough time. Come to find out, she was burned out. That's not what, we discussed, but she said he was really helpful during a tough time. And so I thought, okay, let me call him. And so I said, "Roger, can I come and see you?" And he said, "Sure, Neha, at the end of the day, I'd be happy to talk to you." And I said, "How about now?" And that was when he said, "Come right over." And so I thought I was sidelining him, like doctors sideline each, like, "Hey, what do you think of this? Like, I think it's a this. Would you think I'm okay? Do I need a biopsy?" We all sideline each other. So naively, I thought I was going to just sideline him. He would give me a pep talk and I would be back at work. But 1 hour later, he wrote me a prescription for stress leave and gave me a prescription for Prozac. And I was heading home. And in under a few minutes, I went from being a doctor running the hospital to a patient in line to get Prozac. So pretty shocking day for sure.
I remember when I was a brand new intern in the hospital, I passed out in a patient's room. I was so exhausted. And I remember like that feeling of like being wheeled to the emergency department, and they're like, "Well, at least you maintain function of your bowels." And I'm like, "Yeah, but like, it was just
So embarrassing.
oh
Like
my
it's really
God.
quite embarrassing. Yeah.
Yeah. But so from there, so you got the prescription, you're on your way home,
Yeah.
and what were the next steps for you in terms of like what what did you make any changes? Did you, how did it feel?
I don't remember much of the ride home, which tells me I shouldn't have been driving home. But I do remember as I was driving, just looking on the seat next to me at a med that I had prescribed many times for many people. And just having like all the side effects kind of flashing before me of pharmacology class and everything that I knew. And I was driving and I was just thinking to myself, I don't know what's wrong with me right now, but I'm pretty sure it's not a Prozac deficiency. And I had the awareness of complete and utter confusion, almost like someone who's been stunned after a trauma with no real understanding of what was going to be next. So I took that prescription, got home, put it in my top drawer in case I needed it someday. And the psychiatrist actually asked me to come back weekly and talk to him. And really, it was during those sessions that I began to unravel what is burnout? What is this phenomenon that I'm experiencing? What's my role in this? What's the environment's role in this? The hospital and how fast things were moving and how we were understaffed and how it was like a chronic way to stay on budget. And then what were my bigger world experiences that were all playing? I call it me, we world. And now I know what I did. But back then, I don't think I was like looking up what is burnout. There was very little on it. In 2003, I mean, even as a medical world, we were barely acknowledging its existence. Christina Moslock and Michael P. Leiter are researchers, and they were busy trying to research all of this. But the medical world at large didn't take it seriously. In fact, judged it quite harshly. It was more about if you can't hack it, get out. And I felt a lot of self-judgment. And so I'd say for someone who uses work as a coping mechanism to feel valuable, to feel important, to feel, like someone who matters in the world, I used work for much of my life as that crutch. And so to be forced on stress leave, where some people might think, oh, you're lazy, oh, you get paid and you have all this time off. That was the hardest thing in the world for me, to be alone with my thoughts and not be able to do anything. And you can tell, right? It's pretty hard for a doctor to become a patient, right? I start deciding when I'll take those meds and when I'll do all this. And I'll tell you kind of the most surprising piece. Every week for 5 weeks, I started speaking to him and learning so much about burnout and what had happened and my people pleasing nature and how I was trying to single-handedly, fill the vacancies in the hospital rather than kind of looking at the system and what was actually happening there. And by about the 5th week, I started to sleep again. My throat constrictions started relaxing. And I remember walking into his office and him saying to me, "Oh my gosh, Neha, you're looking so much better. That Prozac is kicking in. It's right on time." And I said, "Roger, listen, I actually didn't take the Prozac. I remembered all the side effects that would come with it. And that scared me more than what I was feeling. And so I wanted to see if our sessions would be helpful first. And then if they weren't, I knew I had it if I wanted to start taking it." And the look on his face was shocking to me because he looked disappointed, kind of upset. And he said, "Neha, if you're not going to take the medication, I can't be the provider that sees you. Insurance doesn't pay me to take care of patients who aren't on medication. So do you want to take the medication or would you like to get another provider?" And I just remember thinking, wait, I thought it might be a good thing that I'm not on the medication and we're making progress. But like in this system, it's not. In this moment, it wasn't going to allow me to be with the provider I wanted to be with. And that was shocking to me. That was the beginning of me understanding where the gaps are in traditional medicine and why people may not be getting what they need. So it became my 20-year journey after that to heal myself, figure this out, and not just heal myself, but find other providers who could help me on the journey because I had a lot to learn. I had a lot to unlearn before I could learn.
That's such a great way of phrasing it. That unlearning. Oh my goodness. That's where, for so many of us, I feel like the real work is.
That's right.
Because, I think that there is this inclination, especially as people who maybe identify with being a people pleaser or who use work to cope. I definitely can relate to that. There's this like drive to want to learn things and incorporate them. Is that being like the thing that we gravitate towards first before we look at, maybe what's not serving me that I should take out of my, that I should work to unlearn. It's like not as natural of an inclination, but so important.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my training had taught me that it was a badge of honor to just do whatever was necessary to take care of any crisis emerging in front of me rather than pay attention to my own biology. They literally, in many ways, train us to think we're superhuman and that we have all the answers and we can walk into any crisis and we're going to be able to do this. And that day I hit a brick wall and it was a huge wake-up call.
Something that I was very intrigued by, and this is something, this has been my experience. I know there's many reasons that somebody might find themselves on a path to burnout, but I've been really heartened to see more people talking about the role that unhealed trauma plays in burnout. And could you tell us a little bit about how that can happen? What role that unhealed trauma can play in someone developing burnout?
Sure. It's enormous. So first of all, my greatest teacher in this is Gabor Mate. So if anybody's interested in learning more on that, he is the one that I learned from. So I had trauma pretty early in my life. My family didn't think of it that way, but your culture, your upbringing, what Gabor says is that it's not what happened to you. It's the meaning you make of what happens to you. And so I'm Indian by culture and upbringing, and my parents live in extended families. And so to them, they think nothing of like handing kids to the extended aunts and uncles and grandparents, and you just kind of hand them all around like it's like their parents. So my grandmother came to take care of me and my older sister, when we were really young. And then my grandfather got called by the United Nations to go to Africa on assignment to help in their agriculture department. He wanted my grandmother to come. So my grandmother packs me up, takes me with her. I'm 3 months old, takes me with her until I'm 2. So of course they took amazing care of me. And I had this beautiful, I can see in all the pictures, I look quite dolled up and happy. But when my mom and my sister, my older sister, came to pick me up, apparently I cried for nearly a month straight. Wouldn't call my dad, would only call him, hey, you. I mean, I was angry as a 2-year-old. After he took time off, spent time with me, I think I upgraded him to uncle, hey, uncle. Eventually he was persistent and he became dad, but I was mad. And when I realized in this new life that, I had an older sister who was 3.5 and I was 2, I wasn't this floppy baby she could control. So her nature was to feel a little jealous of me coming in now, because now you got to split your parents' love. And she didn't really like that. And I think her answer to that was to start bullying me quite young. So here I am. I've lost who I think are my parents. That's traumatic. It was my grandparents. That's traumatic. And then I come into an environment that doesn't feel safe. So what I did was I shut down all emotions. Those weren't safe. I got in trouble for those. I didn't communicate or say anything. And then I looked around me and started people pleasing. Anything anyone wanted from me, I was going to give it to them. And that continued. Now, my mom's brother lived with us. My uncle, Mukumama, is what I call him. And I got very close to him because I thought he saw me. He understood me. But when I was 10 years old, I was supposed to be on a plane with him. He had a 4-seater plane that him and a bunch of buddies invested in. And he was going to take me on a ride. And that day he said, "Nah, I'm not going to take you. There's 4 seatbelts. I'm going to take a friend and 2 kids, his 2 kids." And I was mad, mad, mad. Well, he crashed and died that day. And so there's another trauma of being left, right? Feeling like I'm being left. Fast forward in my life, I'm now in the hospital. I'm an engineer. I'm a doctor. I'm working. And I find myself taking that people-pleasing nature and all my workarounds to be really tuned into the outside world and what they think success is and what I can do to perform, just as I did in my family as a little girl, very unconsciously due to that trauma. And it wasn't until I literally burned out that I was willing to look at my own part in this, which was the unhealed trauma that had led me to people-pleasing and ultimately contributed to my burnout. Now, something I really want people listening to know is burnout's not your fault. Could that little 2-year-old be at fault for, feeling pain and trying to figure out how to survive best she knew how in an environment that felt really foreign and tough to her? No. Was it my parents' fault? No. So it's not about the blame. It's more about understanding that there's an individual component and patterns and behavior that we use to adapt to trauma and survive. And then we just continue using those strategies long after they're no longer useful or needed. That's when we end up hitting a wall, when everything we know, all the coping mechanisms, all the strategies that we know don't really fit the environment we're in. So it's really about outgrowing those. And that's why I call burnout a wake-up call.
I can relate to that so much, just the wake-up call. I've had many in my in my life, but
if you ignore them, they just get louder.
Yes. Well, one of my favorites that I write about this in my second book, where when my father was going through treatment for pancreatic cancer, and we had just, my sister, my mother, and I just kind of threw our lives upside down to just be there and take care of him. And I was working 7 days a week at the time, and I remember my immune system was shot because I wasn't sleeping. And I developed a really bad infection in my thumbnail, something that normally your body would clear, no problem. But I ended up having to get the freaking nail taken off. I ended up taking an antibiotic I didn't know I was allergic to. And so I developed, your classic drug rash, but I was so checked out of my own body. I was like, oh, it's eczema. It's winter. It's just eczema. To the point where I showed up to a shift at one of my jobs that one morning, I had started to go into a slow burn of an anaphylactic reaction. My neck was getting red. My face was starting to swell. My eyes were starting to swell shut. My throat was starting to, and they were like, we need to give you Benadryl stat. We can't even send you to the ER. You're past EpiPen status. We got to take care of this now. And I just remember that night lying there being like, gosh, here I am so focused on taking care of my father. And if I had tried to like sleep it off, I probably could have just died. And what good would I have been to him as a caregiver then, you know? But it was just like, that was for me. I just remember the feeling the next day of like I don't know if shame is the word, but just that realization of like, here I am, the healthcare provider, telling people to listen to their body. And yet I had ignored this huge wake up call because I was so just focused on all the things I had to do and was just so in that burnout mode. And that was it was hard to make changes while in that caregiver mode,
Yeah.
and still working. But I remember, that was like, okay, I have to take this seriously because the consequences could be fatal.
Yeah. It just keeps getting louder. In residency, we all joke around. I mean, we say things like they're normal, which is eat when you can, pee when you can, sleep when you can. These are like side, things that are a nice idea if we can get to them. But if we can't, onward. And I think there's a lot of industries that in many ways program their people that way. If you're going to succeed in investment banking, in the first few years of a law firm, there's all these ways in our society you have to pay your dues. And I think that's going to change. I don't think that treating other human beings as if they're machines and making them prove things is really great for our biology. And in the long run, if you want to discard and throw your workforce out, you want to do the churn and burn, I think people are going to start making different choices.
I remember once applying for, I did a very clinical internship, and later, a few years later, applying for a job at that hospital. And the supervisor who was interviewing me, she was like, "Are you sure you want to work here?" Like, because it was very much, she was like, "No, the turnover rate is really high. Are you sure?" And, it's stuff like that. And I remember quitting a few months in because I saw just how, the conditions for the workers. And I was like, if I don't get myself out of here, I'm going to get myself in trouble. And like, it's not going to be a good thing.
Well, how many people walk into an interview and think that it's about somebody else interviewing them?
Yeah.
One of the things I learned very early when I started getting bullied actually in the hospital as well, which is, here's another thing that happens with trauma. If I am someone who's bullied as a young child and bullied and it becomes normal in my world that to expect this, now I go out into the world and unhealed trauma shows up again. So I start getting bullied in the hospital by another doctor. And if I would give this person more difficult patients when I distributed the patient load, and by the way, I wasn't busy deciphering which patient I was giving. I was taking the patients that were there and just distributing them to the number of doctors that we had. But he would come in and swear and yell at me and how dare you do this? And you give that liver transplant patient to someone else. And I remember that being the case and me calling home and asking my father, who's an immigrant, came here 42 years, worked at General Motors as an engineer. And when I said to him, "Dad, I don't think I'm going to be able to do what you do. I'm only 3 months in and I'm getting bullied." And he said to me, I said, "I'll never become a physician partner." And he said to me, "Listen, they're not the only ones. You're not just being interviewed by them in these 3 years to see if you can become a partner. You're interviewing them to see if this is a firm you want to be a partner of." And that just really shifted my power center, where I really got that it wasn't about disappointing my parents, right? That whole pleasing thing that came in, that he would back me. And it was actually about me also getting to decide. And so I would say to anybody who's having an interview experience at a job, it's not only someone, interviewing you and seeing if you're a good fit. It's about you really assessing if this is a good fit for you. And I don't care what the name or the brand or I don't care what company it is. It's really about you getting to decide as well. And so don't give up or forget about your own choice.
That is such valuable advice, I think, and applicable to so many industries, everything. I think for people who maybe do have that people pleasing background, it's really hard to make that mindset shift, but really, really important.
I heard something yesterday that said, don't be so worried about whether, someone likes you or whether you belong. Pay attention to how other people treat you, because that's much more important than whether or not you belong or they like you. It's really about how they treat you.
Oh, that's really juicy. It's really good. So I was hoping to shift gears for a moment, not completely shift gears, but I wanted to chat a little bit about spiritual burnout. Like this is something that I did not acknowledge early in my career. I was so focused on the physical aspects of burnout that I remember hitting a different kind of brick wall and being like, "Oh, this is a whole other animal." But could you tell our listeners a little bit about what spiritual burnout is and how it can show up?
Sure. So burnout's a tricky animal. Let's just say we didn't get to a worldwide global epidemic of burnout and mental health concerns because this is easy to figure out. Most of the world doesn't actually understand the complexity of it. And that's why you see a lot of like quick fixes, like massage chairs on Friday, or just focus on the physical. What I do in Powered by Me, From Burned Out to Fully Charged at Work and in Life, this book actually takes you anywhere you are from burned out to fully charged. And it has you assess whether you're having a net gain or a net drain of energy on a physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual level. And when you do kind of like a sweep, and let's say you came up with, wow, I'm doing okay on the other levels, but boy, the spiritual section, I'm having a net drain of energy here. The way that I look at this is it's actually where everything starts. Because the way I define spiritual is it's about what matters most to you. It's about your highest values. It's on a grander scale, it's about our interconnectedness, that we are actually part of nature. We are a biological, living, breathing entity, just like the trees and the planet and all these things. Like we are actually all connected. So when I think spiritual burnout, I think about really the small choices that we made. Like burnout starts on a spiritual level because it's like a breach of things that seem like they're small decisions where you say yes when you really mean no, when you choose work over family again, when you say yes to taking another shift when you really should have said yes to a good night's sleep, when you say yes because the money is good, but you feel no passion. And in fact, your values might go against what you just said yes to. And so it's about knowing what you value, trusting yourself. So self-trust is a big part of spiritual burnout, but it's really about making decisions based on your top values and in what order you prioritize them. So the way that I make decisions, let's say, for example, this is silly, but I have had an autoimmune challenge in my life since I was a young girl, and my thyroid gives me a lot of problems. Well, it doesn't give me problems. Let me rephrase that. Body, I'm going to apologize to my body. My body's talking to me, and sometimes I don't listen, is a much better way to say it. And so I started getting some skin issues and started realizing that I had some food sensitivities. Well, I decided on this trip, I went to Europe this summer for some time, and I decided that I was going to drink some lemon water in the morning and some celery juice every day. And so I was with someone who said, "Oh, listen, Neha, I found a juicer for you, but it's going to cost you 350 euros to get it. And we're only here for 6 weeks." And so I didn't get it. And right away I said, "Could you go ahead and buy that?" Because the way I think of it is like, love, integrity, service, beauty, and play are some of my highest values. And under love, it includes self-love and health. And yes, integrity in my finances is really important to me, but health is above finances. So if my body needs something to care for it, ever since my burnout, I will take another shift. I will work harder. I will do what I need to make sure that my health is intact. And so when my choice is health over the money, I know very clearly that, you know what I'll do? Then I also under love care about community. What I decided was I was going to pay for that. I was going to use it, get my first celery juice every day. And then I was going to gift it to someone who needed it when I left. Because I also care about sustainability, and that's the integrity piece. And so that's exactly what we did. But you start in spiritual burnout, there's this place where you're out of alignment with what matters most to you. Maybe you don't even know what your highest values are. You can't name them. Well, if you can't name them, you really can't make decisions very clearly, especially as they get complicated. So it's about that highest values, self-trust, um, decision making based on those values, and what I call the sacred exchange, which is that when I'm with you, I'm really with you, that I am present to the experience happening with myself and others. And so that's where meaning happens. And then finally, it's about finding the meaning and purpose in your work. And some people say to me, well, my meaning and purpose isn't in my work. And I say, well, that's fine. Just know that something you do this many hours a week, if you don't have meaning and purpose in it, there will be a net drain of energy. Or worse yet, if you're in a job and you don't believe in the practices or the purpose of the actual organization, or it's solely making money or profit. Profit's very important, but that's more of a byproduct. That's like, you should have a purpose higher than profit and then do something good, like meet society's needs at scale. And the byproduct is you will be very abundant and you will have profit. But a lot of people mistake it for the goal. And then they're willing to run over other people and, hurt other people, hurt the planet, do all sorts of things and then they wonder why they're out of sorts.
Yeah. So for somebody who is starting to recognize that that's where they're at, that they're in that out of sorts, maybe they recognize they're in
misalignment,
Yes.
like, what I value is not where I spend my time.
Yeah. So what would you tell someone who is like, oh, okay, shit, we gotta course correct here. Like where would they start?
Yeah. Well, you know what? A great thing to do is on the left-hand side, take an empty piece of paper. Let's just make it really simple. If where you're starting is, I don't know what I value, then a pretty easy way to figure out what you value is think about someone you admire. Who do you admire? Maybe you know them. Maybe it's someone out in the world. Who do you admire? And then write down 3 things you admire about them. And then once you look at those 3 things, what I want you to know is they're in you and there's something you value. So it's a good starting point. Another thing you can do is answer the question, if I wasn't in the room, 3 things that someone could say about me that would really move me, that would be really important to me would be. And so for me, it would be that I am aligned, that I strive to, I'm definitely not perfect, but that I make a very sincere effort to be in my life that which I write about and teach. So I call that alignment. So if someone said that about me, it would really matter to me. If they said that I was kind and generous, that would really matter to me. If they said I had an open heart and I met people with, compassion. So now right away, some of my highest values, right? Compassion, connection, alignment. So the first thing, and the last thing I'd say that would be an exercise for that would be something like, talk about a time in your life when you felt truly seen and valued at work, at home, with a best friend, maybe you got an award or recognition. And maybe it's not even something really big. Maybe it was just something small, but it mattered. Write about what that is, because from there you can figure out your values. Because without your values, nothing else is going to become clear. And then once you get your highest values, what I would say is, if you're somebody who doesn't know whether you have a lot of self-trust or not, what I would ask you is, talk to me about where you take risks in the world. Are you someone who is ready to, climb a mountain and get some gear and learn how to, hike Mount Kilimanjaro? Okay, then you probably take physical risks. I mean, personally for me, that is not where I take my risks.
Yeah.
But what about mental risks? Are you somebody who is willing to have the hard conversations, go where other people are unwilling to go? Maybe it's politics, maybe it's religion, I don't know. But you may be willing to take mental risks. Are you someone who's willing to take emotional risks, which means you show up in the world and you're willing to take another try at love, even if it didn't work out before? That's an emotional risk. Are you willing to be an entrepreneur and put your name out there? And even if it fails, you say, that's okay. These are emotional risks. Are you someone who takes social risks? Do you walk up to people you don't know and just, strike up conversation and feel really at ease? Or are you someone who takes spiritual risks, which means you go into the unknown and you're willing to explore awe, mystery, all of that? Figure out where you're willing to take risks and where you're not, because that'll tell you where you have self-trust and where you don't. We don't
So
risk
valuable.
where we don't risk if we don't trust ourselves. So that's the beginning of the spiritual section. And the other thing that I'd say is look at your company's values that they put on the wall. Because a recent study by MIT showed that what companies put on the wall has no correlation to actually the experience of their employees in companies. And so, that came out in 2021 around the Great Resignation time. And it was just such a powerful, awareness that just putting a bunch of values on a wall is not alignment. Alignment is about what you believe, being what you think and what you feel and how you take action in the world. And so the last thing that I'd say is take a blank paper and on the left-hand side, write work, family, friends, social, charity, whatever your big areas in your life, play, entertainment, whatever they are, write them on the left-hand side. And then I want you to rank how important on a scale of 1 to 10 those are to you. So give them a number. And in the next column, I want you to 1 to 10. Tell me how much time, energy, effort, and money you spend on each of those. And then on a scale of 1 to 10. And then subtract how important you say something is by how much time, energy, effort, and money you spend on it. So if you tell me family's at 10 and you're spending 2 on your energy and time on this, right? That would be like a net difference of an 8. There's a gap there and you want to pay attention. That might be where you want to start.
I love that so much. I feel like we all have our versions of that too, where in our heads, we say that something is very important. And then when we actually look at our actions, it's like, oh, okay, that's a different story.
Yeah. I mean, me, it was a game change to really understand what love, integrity, service, beauty, and play mean to me. Beauty isn't just, I had some judgment against it. So pay attention to the values you have judgment against, because I thought beauty was superficial and that I was, that was like a silly one for me to have. Except I spent 1 week writing down and keeping track of everything I thought was beautiful. It was like a parent's glance at their sleeping child. It was a beautiful wildflower when I was walking home. It was someone helping someone elderly across the street, right? It was actually the exchange with my patients after a heart attack, like when they really were just vulnerable and they just said what it meant to them and how it woke them up to their true life. It was also, aesthetics. It matters to me that the environment I'm in is beautiful, that it is decorated, that it is colorful. That lights me up. I'm a very visual person. So as you figure out, pay attention to which values you are drawn to and which ones you have judgment against, because some of the ones you have judgment against, just spend 1 week keeping track of what that word means to you and then reevaluate and give it a chance, because it might be that other people have told you that that's superficial, but when you actually assess what it means to you, it might not feel that way.
That's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I love that perspective.
Yeah.
So kind of on similar, maybe different side of this conversation, because we've been talking about alignment and getting, identifying what you want to be aligned with. You also talk about disconnection. And, what are some signs that someone might be able to recognize that like, oh, this is happening, and, maybe how they might address that if they realize they're in a state of disconnection?
Yeah. So let's just talk for a minute. The triad of burnout. What is burnout? Burnout is physical, mental, emotional exhaustion. So exhaustion is the first pillar. The second one is cynicism. And cynicism creeping in is where people have felt exhausted for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, this little voice comes in that says, it doesn't really matter how hard I try. It's not going to make a difference. You know what? This is all a waste of time and energy. And this almost self-defeating, self-deflating experience of cynicism that creeps in. But when you've been that exhausted for that long, it really becomes about survival. And you're trying to conserve your energy, and you must disconnect from things that are taking your energy. And so there might be some social distancing that starts happening where, it's too much energy to interact with others. I'd rather just be alone. There's ways that we start to disconnect. And then the third of the triad of burnout is ineffectiveness. So it's exhaustion, cynicism, ineffectiveness. And that cynicism is like, it's depersonalization. Do you remember at the beginning when I was talking about asking for 40 milliequivalents of IV potassium to be given to the gentleman in 636? So now I'm starting to refer to people by their room number, right? Rather than who they are. Not because I'm not a caring doctor, but literally because I don't have the energy. I don't have the energy to connect to the human. So where I think this all starts, the disconnection, I think, starts young. I think when we're born into the world, our needs are about getting our diapers changed, getting fed, getting to sleep, etc. We learn very quickly that our needs will get met by how well we can communicate our needs to the world around us. And from there, we start paying attention to whether what we do makes somebody else smile or not. Then it becomes about getting what we want. Then it's about our family's approval. Then it becomes about, in our teenage years, about our peers' approval. And then it moves into our significant other and our work. And so we have this way that we, from the very beginning, start to tune out of our own body's physiology. And that is where the disconnection begins, because our body is talking. It's always in communication with us. The question is, are we listening? And when you decide that the pit in your stomach, when you enter your place of work, or you have to have, you are spending time with a certain person, and you just don't feel good, you feel drained, and you override that with a double latte or a chocolate chip cookie, that's how simple disconnection begins. It begins with us not taking our own body's physical sensations seriously, or oftentimes that's because we don't know how to decipher them. People don't know what, I didn't for many years know what throat constriction meant to me. What was my body trying to tell me? Or your stomach dropping or your heart racing, like it's in the way of you getting over your next deadline. So we've come up with these ways to disconnect and power through our bodies rather than partner with it. And that is where disconnection begins. So the first thing I'd say is slow down, tune in. Don't just look for data from the external world. Pay attention to your internal data.
Oh my God. That is so many people I talk to, they are telling me about all these symptoms they're having, all these things that are going on. And they're like, well, I'm not stressed. I always ask my patients, like on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being no stress, 10 being unbearable stress, where do you feel like you are right now? And anytime someone tells me their stress is like a 1, I'm like, really? Like, and they're like, oh, I'm not stressed. But then meanwhile, some of the things that you're describing, are really causing them a lot. They're coming to see me because they're having these issues. And it's, that's just an example of how stress can show up. But I remember
even in the early signs of burnout, stress can show up as irritability. It can show up as constipation or diarrhea, headaches, fatigue. Now, the problem is that you always need to get any physical symptoms checked out by a medical provider first and get a clean bill of health. And when they say nothing's wrong with you, but something's wrong, pay attention now that it could be something like burnout going on, right? But you don't just go to the symptoms of burnout first and say, oh, I think this is burnout, and ignore something that could be a really big physical deal that might be able to be taken care of. But once you get a clean bill of health, if someone tells you, hey, you're fine, and you're like, no, I'm not. You're walking, like I would never have made a trip to the emergency department if I was fine. Trust yourself. Trust that what they're saying to you is your heart physically is functioning well, but there might be something unresolved on a mental, emotional, social, or spiritual level that is now showing up in your physical body to get your attention. And that's what I wish every provider would say, rather than saying, good news, the labs came back, your EKG came back, nothing's wrong with you. This person's not here because nothing's wrong with them. But you can certainly say to them on a physical level, the good news is your heart's functioning really well. The bad news is something else needs to be addressed. And because it's not being addressed, it's probably showing up on a physical level.
I wish more providers would have that conversation. I remember in my mid 30s, or maybe I don't know. Yeah, like I during times of intense stress, I didn't notice the pattern until after a while. But I'm someone, if you were to look at me, like you wouldn't think I've had cholesterol, right? Like,
Yeah.
and as per, if someone were to look at my diet on paper, not something that would come up. And I've seen this with like I've had vegans who've had this issue, vegetarians, but I did have a few times in my life where my LDL cholesterol was a bit elevated. And, even I remember a doctor once handing me like an education sheet. She's like, oh, just follow this diet. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I've written this handout, and this, but what I wasn't acknowledging at that time and what the doctor wasn't asking me about was like, okay, well, how's your stress level? Because we know that cortisol can play a role in, well, this better than anyone. Like, but it's not part of the conversation. I remember just leaving that office that when I finally something started to click when I was noticing a pattern, I was like, this provider is because she was too burned out to be, to be able to like have the conversation with me. Because that's something, I don't know what your experience is, but being a healthcare provider, I feel like I can tell when another provider is in that place. And it's something that keeps me on my toes to be as mindful as I can to not get to that point because I don't want my patients to see that.
Yeah.
But it's like sometimes I'm like I've had the experience of like wanting to like ask my doctor, like, are you okay?
Yeah. And here's the deal. It's all connected. So it doesn't matter where you start to make changes.
Yeah.
They will affect everything else. And so, yes, your stress levels are connected, to your sleep, which is connected to your ability to heal, which is your immune system, is connected to, if you get sick, it's connected to your feeling down and sad and your emotions because you might miss something, right? And so everything's connected. And I think that's part of why burnout has been a really hard topic for people to get their head and heart around because it seems too big. It seems like too many different ways that it comes in and nobody can really kind of, say, well, this is how it happens. Each person has to discover that for themselves, just like each person has to discover the unique language of how their body talks to them. When I have throat constriction now and my stomach turning, I know what it means. I'm usually in a situation where I'm deciding whether I'm going to speak my truth or not. And once I do, it all goes away.
Growing up, yeah. My mother growing up, my mother always used to say to me, if I had a sore throat or my throat was tight, she's like, so that's your throat chakra. What do you need to say that you feel like you can't say?
Wow.
And
Talk about an evolved mom.
I'm very lucky. Yeah. That was very valuable to just grow up being taught about that. Cause I think it's helped me recognize those signs sometimes in a way that maybe not else, but that I can imagine that being a game changer when, like being able to get that input, that internal hit and just realize like, oh yes, this is what this is about.
I think to myself, when little kids are playing and they're blowing bubbles, they're doing whatever. And then their mom says, okay, it's time to go to school, or their parent says it. Right. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, I have a stomach ache. I have a tummy ache. I can't go to school. And the parent goes, I just saw you playing with your brother. Like, you're fine. Get up and go to school. You know what your child just told you? Your child just told you some version of, it is dangerous where I'm going. Because their body just said, I am going to be isolated on the bus. I'm being bullied at school. I'm going to be left out. I don't know what it's telling you. But your body speaks. And we look at things very physically. And we say like, you're fine, but we don't really recognize like your mom did and teach you that your inner world, your physiology, the physical signals coming from your body, that's important data. And for everybody listening, if you're somebody who's tuned out to this, what I want you to know is you are ready for an up-leveling and a brand new world because you're going to get a whole new set of data that's going to make it so much easier to navigate our complex world once you understand it.
So one question I love asking my guests who are healthcare providers and people who are out there taking care of caring for others, whether, it's through like patient care or the work that they're doing is, helping others. What are some of your self-care essentials today?
From a woman who used to had a very well tested coping equation of 2 ice cold 16-ounce Mountain Dews plus a king size Snickers bar will get me through 36 hours of not sleeping. One of the most important things I do is connect how I fuel myself to how I feel. And now I am pretty amazing at making sure, even when I travel, that I eat whole foods, that I'm very aware of what works and doesn't work for my body, what gives me congestion. Dairy often gives me congestion. So, as much as I love cheese and ice cream, I make sure that I don't do that to my body. So, I'm really in tune with what I eat and how it works with my body. And I really make that one of my top priorities. That's been probably the biggest shift. I also now am pretty good at sleeping, and I go to bed. I get in bed around 10:30. I'm asleep at 11 and I'm up around 7 o'clock. So I make sure I get my sleep almost no matter what. And I think people really need to understand the importance of sleep. That in your world, people think sleep is a waste of time. Oh, I'll catch up on my sleep this weekend, or if I need more time, I'll just take it out of sleep. I get that sleep's a waste of time because nothing's getting done on your external to-do list, but there's an entire internal to-do list going on for your body that it needs to get through. And if you don't do it, that's a losing game. So sleep, definitely my food and supplements, I do that. I would say too, I have lemon water in the morning and celery juice, which really helps me feel grounded and clears out my system. Once a year, I actually spend 3 weeks at an Ayurvedic healing retreat. I do that. For me, my meditation is journaling or talking to a friend. And so every day I make sure that I either talk it out, because I'm much more audiovisual, or write it out. And so that's how I attend to my emotions. And then I would say socially, connection really matters to me. And so what I have done very diligently is weeded out the people in my life that don't feel like they've got my back, that I make sure that I'm treated really well. And if I have a client on my schedule and 3 times I feel a drain in energy, I will make sure that the next round I say to them, you know what? I think it might be a good idea if I help you find a better fit. And I care about my own, and I'm happy to refund their money. No problem. Like, my energy is that sacred to me. So I think probably the big thing that I tell you I do is I pay attention to my energy. Now, my growth edge, big time, is physical movement. That I have not been as good at. And it's like next on deck, which is, how can I make this really fun? How do I find fun ways? And sometimes that's putting on a fun dance, a song and dancing as I get ready. I'm trying to warm myself into this because I haven't been the greatest at it.
Yeah, well, I love to hear that you prioritize the fun piece of the picture. I think not enough people focus on that when it comes to movement. Like, I don't know. I'm always telling my patients, I'm like, the best exercise is the one you'll enjoy and be consistent with. Like, there's so many opinions on like what's like physiologically the best workout. And like, who cares if it feels good? Like, that's all that really matters.
Yeah. Yeah. I found this incredible dance, women's dance, and it's called Koya, Qoya. And it's Rochelle Sheik is the one who puts it on, but she basically merges like a social experience with other women and yoga and dance, and it's free form. And she always says it's not about what it looks like, it's about what it feels like. And your job is not to worry about what anyone else is doing, or they don't care about what you look like. They're trying to have their own experience. So like, if you're more worried about what it looks like than what it feels like, pay attention. And that has given me a lot of freedom to really get more comfortable in my body.
I love that so much. So for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, connect with you, what is the best way for them to do so?
Well, my book is a great way. I have 2 of them actually. The first one is called Talk RX, from 5 steps to honest conversations that create connection, health, and happiness. And that's on Audible, so they can get that. I recently got the rights back to that book. So I will be republishing it next year. So it might be a little harder to find in other forms, but definitely on Audible. And then the second book is Powered by Me, From Burned Out to Fully Charged at Work and in Life. And you can get that anywhere. That's on pre-order right now. And it will be on regular order as of September 19th. And then I would say intuitiveintelligenceinc.com. So the name of my company is Intuitive Intelligence. And what I mean by that is we as we were speaking about, that your external data is so important. What I really want people to know is that your lived experience in your own body, your physiology, your intuition is a combination of all these other intelligences: physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual. They might be invisible, but that doesn't mean they're not important. So it's called intuitiveintelligenceinc.com, and they can find me there. And podcasts and everything will be there, blogs, all of it.
All right. We will be sure to link to that in the show notes. So thank you again so much for your time. The last question I ask all my guests is, what does healthy living mean to you today, this moment in time?
I think it just means taking your next step to live a more aligned, true life. Whatever truth means to you, whatever, from the inside out, not from the outside in, not what other people think would be a good life or a healthy life. It's about how it feels to be in your own body. What gives you peace of mind? What makes your heart sing? And what helps your spirit soar? What really connects you to what matters? So it's living a healthy life is taking the next step towards that alignment, whatever that is for you.
I love that so much. I have goosebumps just thinking about that. Oh. All right. So again, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and for all of you guys who are listening. Thank you as always for being here with us. You matter so much. So thank you. As always, guys, if you like what you hear, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. They do matter. Help me to continue to bring you incredible guests like today's. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.